Hi everyone, welcome back. During our last slide set, I discussed very briefly at the very end about the rising state of Sparta. And we need to look at how the emerging differences between this military-dominated state of Sparta and the sort of cultural, democratic state of Athens to the north, how these two powers will eventually come to blows. But before we do that, before we actually see fighting amongst two of the Greek city-states, we're going to have to see the Greek city-states fighting an external power first and uniting to accomplish that goal. The Persian War will be the first major military event that will take place in the 5th century for the Greek city-states. And in this case, they're not going to be fighting one another. They're going to be having to get on the same page and coordinating their military supplies, their training, working together to defeat a very large common enemy. You can see from the map here how extensive the Persian Empire was at this point in time, and how tiny, by comparison, the Greek city-states appear here on the far western edges of the Persian Empire. It would seem like a no-brainer looking at this map that the Persians should have easily been able to vanquish or conquer the Greek city-states, but actually that's not how things took place. There were two major rounds between the Persians and the Greek city-states. During round one, the Greeks hear that the Persians have mobilized their troops and are heading their way, and very hastily they will begin coordinating amongst themselves to try and respond and repel this threat. During the first thrust of the Persian War, the Persians' major area for conquest will be the city-state of Athens, because at that point it is a very wealthy city-state. And so what the Persians will do is land just north of the city-state of Athens at a village known as Marathon. And when the Persians land, the Greeks, as I said, have figured out what's going on. They will mount a force, and the Battle of Marathon will end up being a great victory for the Athenians and their supporters during this period. So in round one of the Persian Wars, the Persians will be defeated. They will not be able to achieve their goals. At that point, King Darius I of the Persians is incensed. He's enraged. He can't believe that all of his resources have not been able to mobilize to defeat the Greeks. So he is preparing for a second invasion of the Greek mainland, but he dies before his plans are complete. The task of going after the Greeks now fell to his son Xerxes, who eagerly took up his father's cause, ordering the construction of many more ships and the formation of many new infantry units, so that they might be able to attack by land and by sea. The second Persian invasion of the Greeks went a little bit more successfully from the standpoint of the Persians. The Greeks once more allied amongst themselves when they heard that the Persians were coming once more. And the Persians were briefly held off at the Battle of Thermopylae, again north of Athens. But eventually the Persians, with superior numbers, were able to overwhelm the Greeks and defeat them, making their way to the city-state of Athens, where they will ultimately burn the city to the ground and loot it of its wealth. Fortunately for the Greeks, however, they were able to once more emphasize cooperation amongst themselves and eventually defeat the Persians, not just once, but twice. The Persians will gradually be expelled from Athens and surrounding areas, and the Persians will be defeated in the Persian War. Now, the main way in which the Greeks were able to do this, to successfully sort of repel such a large and fearsome invader, was by coordinating their efforts. And what we're going to see is the Delian League will be formed in 478 BC after the Persian War. And this will be a defensive alliance among many of these Greek city-states who had temporarily allied together. Now they're trying to turn this into a permanent defensive alliance, so that if the Persians came back a third time, they would be ready. They would have already had their troops training together. They would have already, member states would have sent in money to a common treasury to pay for new weapons and, ships, these sorts of things. Over time, what we're going to see is Athens will start to become the bully of the Delian League. They will, for instance, deny membership to certain states that want to join. Conversely, they will, for certain states who say, well, maybe we're not ready to join right now, Athens will force them to join against their will. If you'll notice, Sparta decided to stay out of the Delian League. They coordinated their own defensive alliance in the southern Peloponnesus. And proof that Athens will start to, as I say, kind of become bully and dominate many of these other states will be very clear by 454 BC, when the treasury of the Delian League will be forcibly moved to the city-state of Athens. They will decide that they will take care of the accounting and bookkeeping at that point in time. Now, as odd as it may seem, in the period immediately following the Persian War, the city-state of Athens, this is when they will really start to become a major, not only cultural force, but military force as well. This despite the fact that their city had been burnt to the ground and looted. Many Athenians had been able to flee from the city before the Persian invasion, taking some things with them. So there wasn't a huge loss of life for the Athenians. So when the Persians are finally expelled from the Greek mainland, the Athenians will simply return to the site of their city and begin rebuilding it. And a lot of this will be done under the leadership of a very charismatic leader by the name of Pericles. And Pericles is going to start taking the Athenians in a different direction on several different fronts. Most notably, he will oversee the physical rebuilding of the city of Athens during this period. And several architectural masterpieces of the era, the Parthenon, for instance, the Propylaea, these will be constructed in Athens during this era. For the Athenian peoples, they are overjoyed. The city is paying stonemasons and engineers and architects, carpenters to come in and help rebuild their city more glorious than ever. And Pericles, the way he is financing all of this rebuilding is he's dipping into the funds of the Delian League, the defensive alliance. All the money that these member states have been sending in recent years to pay for troops, to pay for training, for military preparedness. Pericles is what we'd call today misappropriating those funds. He's using the funds of the Delian League to help rebuild the city-state of Athens. And from the standpoint of the Athenian people, they love him for this. He is pulling out all the stops and trying to create a gorgeous city to the measure of the people and providing jobs in the process. So his domestic policy will be focused on those things. With his political policy, Pericles will also earn the loyalty of many sort of middle to lower class peoples by expanding the notion of political participation. Now it's not only the rich, the wealthy nobility that can hold public office. He will open up public office to people from other backgrounds. As for political corruption, he's going to try to also clean up some of the most crooked politicians that were serving in the assembly at that point in time. So again, from the standpoint of the Athenian peoples, they see a leader who is really trying to sort of involve them more in the political system and try to get rid of some of the worst abusers of the political system. And then finally, Pericles will take Athens in a very different direction with regard to foreign policy. Not only is Athens controlling the Delian League and stealing some of their funds during this time period, but Pericles is also going to begin arguing that the Persians were not the biggest threat that faced the Greek city-states now. They had been defeated twice. If they came back again, the Athenians would have plenty of lead time or advance notice to begin preparing. Instead, Pericles argued there was a much more serious threat, much closer to Athens, that people needed to be concerned about. A threat that, if they decided to attack Athens, that might not give them enough time to prepare, and that is the city-state of Sparta in the southern Peloponnesus. And so what we're going to see is the sort of years of mutual suspicion between Athens and Sparta. this sort of low-level Cold War of words between the two will eventually break out into open warfare between the two powers, that being the Peloponnesian War that was fought intermittently between 431 and 404 BC. It was called the Peloponnesian War because, as you can see on the map here, the name for the southern peninsula was the Peloponnesus, on which Sparta lay. And as you can also tell from the map, Sparta had its own allies, as did Athens. They had certain city-states that allied with them, as opposed to the Spartans, and several that just said, hey, we want to stay out of this. You can see in the green shaded areas, those that just did not want to participate in this latest bout of fighting. And as you can see, Thucydides, a resident of Athens, is convinced that the Athenians will manage to defeat the Spartans, and he goes on to talk about several reasons why, that unlike the Spartans, who are constantly training for warfare, that the Athenians live at ease, he said, and yet are equally ready to face the perils. He goes on to talk about how their soldiers go into battle with a courage that is not enforced by law, but is one that the Athenian soldiers just naturally have a courageousness that will take them forward. Despite Thucydides' sort of rosy outlook on the war, though, ultimately it will be Sparta that will win this contest, but not for lack of trying on both parts. Athens, their strategy was to withdraw to the safety of their city and to rely upon their navy to go after the Spartans. And unfortunately, this strategy didn't pay off, as just several years into the first conflict, a plague or a mass sickness struck the city of Athens, killing a large proportion of their population. Even with that, the Athenians continued to soldier on and fight the Spartans, and ultimately a peace was brokered. A very long peace was agreed upon by both sides, a ceasefire. Ultimately, that peaceful time, though, the terms of the peace were violated, and Athens and Sparta would once more go at it during this time period. And what we're going to see is ultimately the Spartan strategy of relying upon their very well-trained infantry to effect a land invasion of the Athenians. This is going to win out over time. But the Spartans will not get to enjoy bragging rights for very long, because there's a new threat emerging from the north. This newest threat will be from the Macedonians. You can see the map that I have here, this large sort of orange shaded area to the north of the Greek city-states. It will be the Macedonians who will begin a sustained takeover of the Greek city-states during the 4th century BC under the leadership of Philip II. The Macedonians were culturally very similar to the Greeks. They shared many of the same deities or mythology. They were different, however, they spoke a slightly different language, but lots of cultural similarities. And from the standpoint of Philip II, this Macedonian king who will begin a sustained takeover of the Greek city-states, he actually admires the Greeks and considers all their suicidal rivalries, like the Peloponnesian War, to be a waste of the Greeks' talents. So he's going to begin a sustained takeover of the Greek city-states, and strangely enough will help to unite them for the first time. And they will begin to think of themselves as the Greeks for the first time, while they end up first fighting Philip and then later agreeing to sort of lay down their arms and join him. After Philip II died and was assassinated, his son Alexander III, or as we know him, Alexander the Great, will take over the Macedonian throne. He will secure control of the Greek city-states that his father had just conquered, and then will go after the largest empire in the world at that time, that of the Persians. And what we're going to see is over a 10-year period, he and his troops will cover some 10,000 miles of territory on foot and on horseback, and they will start gobbling up the Persian Empire. But I want to make something very clear. Alexander wanted to unite Greek and Macedonian culture and blend it with Persian culture. He will appoint Persians to positions of power, for instance, within his empire. He is not interested in exterminating Persian culture. He studied it. He admires them. He wants wants to blend the best of East and West under his domination.